All right, welcome back. This is the Something Invested podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest back again is Monique Woodard. Monique, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me again.
Monique is the venture capitalist who, famously in that episode now runs Cake Ventures, but made her way to Silicon Valley through the unusual path of rural Florida and managed to become a venture capitalist here in Silicon Valley. And when we last talked, we walked through your journey and how you're doing. And I sort of had, bent over backwards to make it about your being a venture capitalist and not a, Black or African-American venture capitalist, which I just figured you're freaking tired of talking about. And very carefully titled the episode Venture Capitalist. We now find ourselves in a time when the COVID virus has hit. And on top of that, the Black Lives Matter movement has emerged quite strongly because of a whole series of events that have occurred, culminating, I can't go through them. They've never stopped, but with the killing of George Floyd. And now this is on everyone's mind. So I'll start with, how are you? I always start with, how are you doing? But I'm actually asking that, how are you doing?
Yeah, I think if you ask any Black person in not just America, in the world today, how they're doing, you might get a lot of "I'm fine," but everybody is not fine. Right?
That's right.
So, it's a really interesting time to be Black in America. It's a challenging time, and it's, we're seeing a lot of things that our parents fought for and our parents fought against, and now we're now having to do the same things.
Right.
And so no one is fine. We were all dealing with varying degrees of trauma around seeing all of these videos and all the police brutality and seeing all the protests and turning into riots, and then having to show up every day and be fine, whatever that means.
Right.
But yeah, I think a lot of us are obviously stressed, angry, disappointed. We're having many different emotions.
Right.
So yeah.
Did something, I'm trying to put this the right way, did something actually happen in the past few weeks? Obviously something happened with the killing of George Floyd, or is it something it's just been going on all along, and every once in a while we all white people, I guess, just gonna give ourselves permission to forget about it and say, I don't think it wasn't like 2 years ago nothing was happening. All these things were happening. All these experiences of Black men in the police and so forth and so on. And we just it's not that we don't think it happens, we just sort of forget about it and go, oh, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
And now we've been reminded of it, maybe more than something new happened.
Yeah. It's not that something new and different has happened. Unfortunately, this has been happening for years and years and years. And now white people are paying attention, right? Yeah. In numbers that they had not been paying attention to before. And certainly you can say that coronavirus and shelter in place gave people more attention to be put on this issue, right?
Right.
Because many of us are still sheltering in place. I'm still sheltering in place. The attention is now on Black Lives Matter, even though that movement has been going on for many years. And many Black people have been deeply impacted by police brutality and police violence, over and over again. And George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it has just been like the tipping point into where we find ourselves today.
Do you think it's the one that moved me, which was probably the least physically serious one, was the Central Park woman who yelled at a Black guy, and she basically, if it hadn't been filmed, she sort of knew the trick for getting him in trouble.
Yeah.
And that one just kind of shook me, just in the kind of cynicism of it, and kind of the depth of how, I don't know, I'm obviously having trouble expressing it, but I just wow. Because the guy who recorded it didn't seem super shocked.
Right. I think it exposed a deep pathological racism that certainly a lot of white women understand that if they call the police and modulate their voices in this certain way, they can get a reaction from police to come out and put a Black man's life in danger,
Right.
because that is exactly what she was doing. But you see very similar things in small ways, even in the workplace, where if a white woman cries and you're seen as being too aggressive or speaking to her too aggressively, then you can be reprimanded or and potentially lose your job. Like that is like what you saw with Amy Cooper is to a nth degree,
Right.
but there are daily degrees of that happening all the time for Black people.
Right. I don't feel comfortable with this guy. That kind of, I don't think he's a good fit.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
all the little kind of like microaggression is kind of weird, but the little like, you know
yeah.
what they're talking about.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it
The
did. Oh,
microaggressions. I mean, those Amy Cooper incident was an obvious aggression,
right.
right? And I think it had to be that obvious and be caught on film for for white people mostly, to see it and recognize it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It made me, I realized this. I was telling an African American friend of mine that like not like 6 months ago or so, I was walking down the street and a police car like pulled up next to me, like screeched to a halt next to me. And the cop, the guy in the car leaned out the window and said, "Hey, there's a domestic violence thing going on around here. We got a call. Have you heard anything?" And I was like, "Oh, geez, no, I haven't, sir." And he's like, "Oh, thank you," and rode off. And it occurred to me, like, not for 1 second did it worry me that a police car was screeching to a halt next to me. Like, I wasn't like, "Oh shit, what's happening?" I was just like, "Wonder what this is about. Hope I can help."
Right.
Which obviously is not the experience for a Black guy or a Black person walking around town. It just didn't
Yeah.
occur. It just didn't occur to me.
Yeah. I mean, when a routine traffic stop can mean life or death, right? Philando Castile routine traffic stop.
Right.
um, that's a very different experience than the one you probably have if a police officer pulls up behind you and pulls you over for speeding or a broken taillight or whatever.
Right. Well, so we come to, so it's now Silicon Valley, where you're a player, a venture capitalist, starts to react
Minor
to the, what's that?
player. Minor player.
Whatever. There's not that many venture capitalists on the planet, and you're one of them, damn it. Starts reacting to this. How do you think people have reacted? Like the right way, the wrong way at all? Like how do you think people are, how's Silicon Valley doing with this?
Yeah, I think, it's caused Silicon Valley to come to terms with a lot of their own behavior around race, right? Whether it's who gets funded,
Yep.
either from a, Black entrepreneur perspective, or who gets funded from a Black VC, GP, general partner at a fund perspective, how Silicon Valley treats its workers internally at lots of these large companies. That's also been a factor. And so I think that as we started turning the Black Lives Matter movement lens on police brutality, it's just natural that now it starts to turn on all of these other industries and just things that are happening in the world that I think have been discussed, but maybe swept under the rug for a very long time.
Right.
Right. And so I think what I first saw people doing is saying, oh my God, I've seen the George Floyd video, where can I donate? Right. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing these protests, where can I donate? And then very quickly it went from, what bail fund can I donate to, or what nonprofit organization can I donate to, oh my God, we have a problem in Silicon Valley. Where can I donate this away? Right.
Right. I'm busy.
Right. And, I've had a few investors reach out to me, and they have very pointedly said, I don't have any Black entrepreneurs in my portfolio. I would like to donate some money. And, I was sort of like, okay, wait,
Right.
let
Right.
pause. That's two things. One, yes, you should be donating to all of these great organizations like Black Girls Code or HBCU VC, that tackle the pipeline part for, either girls code, Black girls coding, or Black representation in venture capital. But that doesn't fix your issues with your fund.
Right.
That's you can't just donate that away,
And
right?
what is the issue with the fund? Is it that because you've started the organization Black Founders, right, which increases the number of Black people in technology? Is that
Yeah, we started Black Founders back in 2011, and what we were responding to at that time was scratching the itch of the four founders of Black Founders going to these demo days and going to events and not seeing anyone who looks like us, but being very aware that there were other Black entrepreneurs in the space, and feeling that we weren't getting support in the way that that we should be. And so we wanted to create our own support system. And then from all of that ecosystem building, what I came to discover was that we could do all the ecosystem building we wanted to, but unless at some point we were touching capital, these founders still had to go to Sand Hill Road and not get anywhere,
right?
right?
And is the issue that there's a bunch of Black entrepreneurs who are not getting funded the same rate as white entrepreneurs? Or is it there aren't as many of them as there should be for the population because of something somewhere else in the pipeline?
There are lots of great Black entrepreneurs out there who are just not getting funded at the same rate as their white counterparts, their white peers.
Right.
They just don't have the same access to capital. And that lack of access to capital starts on day zero from the friends and family round, and then continues and exacerbates as they go out to raise a seed round, and as they go out to raise a Series A, and so on and so forth. So it's a problem that is institutional, it's systemic, and it starts from the time you decide to start your company.
Right.
And so you have to start fixing it at the very earliest stages. You have to start fixing it by saying, okay, if there is no friends and family capital available for Black and brown entrepreneurs because of, long systemic racial wealth gaps, how can we invest in these founders early?
Right.
If there are very few seed funds available, how can we create new seed funds? But also, how can you change your fund and your processes
Right.
to make sure that you are getting Black entrepreneurs in the door and giving them the same fair shot at getting an investment from your fund as any other white entrepreneur
Right.
gets.
And how is a venture firm to do that? Because my understanding is one of the things that happens is that when people are going through these phases of guilt that are unfortunately periodic, they then want to give money
Yeah.
to Black founders, which seems like it might be offensive, actually.
I like it when people give me money.
Right.
So,
Right.
however,
Yeah.
however, the messaging can't be that Black founders, Black entrepreneurs are deserving of charity, but they're not deserving of investment.
Yep.
Right. So I want to see more VCs being dedicated to investing and understanding that you're going to get a return from these entrepreneurs because they're great entrepreneurs building amazing businesses. And this isn't charity. This is you hopefully returning a fund.
Right.
This is you doing your job. Like,
Right.
your job is to return a fund.
Yeah.
So,
And so many, there's,
entrepreneurs and do it.
and is it, I mean, do you think there's it's so funny. VCs are so actually sound kind of risk averse in many ways. And you see this around the world where they want, like Singapore, nobody would really invest because there just hadn't been $1 billion company yet. And then once there was, you couldn't get enough investments.
Yeah.
Are we kind of looking for the one monster success where people go, oh, there's $1 billion there. Now I'm going to, you know,
Yeah,
prioritize Black founders.
certainly I think that not if, but when a Black entrepreneur has $1 billion exit, you're going to all of a sudden see a lot of investors who missed out flooding into try to meet with every Black entrepreneur they can.
Yep.
But I'm not willing to wait for that
That's
long, right?
Yeah.
I'm not willing to wait until, it can take 10, 14 years for you to get to some $1 billion exit.
Right.
And I just don't think we should all be waiting for Black entrepreneurs in particular to prove that they're worthy of getting money by having one entrepreneur get to $1 billion outcome.
That's right.
Right. You have to understand that there are Black entrepreneurs here now who are worthy of investment, who could potentially return your fund, and you should be making those investments right now today.
Right. And what is a VC to do this? So they kind of, I think you see some VCs, they try to do the right thing. That's why they say they're donating, they're asking how you're doing and all that. But the practical thing they should do, and I'm sure you're tired of that, right? People asking how you're doing.
Right. There's a lot of how are you doing?
I think they mean well. They just don't know.
They do. A lot of them are my friends, and they do mean well.
Yeah. As a practical matter, VC says, okay, I got to get this right. Like I got to make sure, I'm one guy, I'm a white guy, so I can't really change that. But I'm gonna do the right thing. Like, what should they practically do as an investor? Like, what should they're sincere, they mean it. Like, okay, what do I do?
Yeah. So I think, one of the big things that you can do is, when you can, hire a Black partner, right? Mm-hmm. That's not possible for every fund. I do know that a lot of funds are small on purpose and will not expand the partnership very readily. But if you can, you should be thinking about hiring a Black or a Latinx founder. A lot of these things also mirror in the Latinx community. Right. And just like, when Me Too happened a few years ago, a lot of large VC firms brought on their first woman partners. Right. And almost exclusively, those positions went to white or Asian women VCs. And no Black women VCs were really hired during that time. And so now I think it's time. Well, I mean, I think it's beyond time. Right. For firms and for people to start looking at their partnership and understanding that they are missing wide swaths of the world, of a user base, of a demographic not represented in those meetings when you're talking about what company is going to be the next, Facebook, the next Instagram. And no, go ahead, please.
You've gone off and done it yourself. I mean, you've built a venture capital firm, which is a very hard and very impressive thing to do.
Yeah, building. It's, building a firm is one of the hardest things that a VC will do in their life if they so choose, if they make that wildly ridiculous
crazy move.
If they're crazy enough to do it. And it's a day-to-day process of finding LPs who understand my investing thesis and believe that I'm a good investor and are willing to back me as an LP. But it's one that I could have probably given up many times because certainly other people have asked me to join their firms. Yeah. But it's one that I believe that there are too few Black women in the GPC, right, who have been able to raise funds and to raise funds of any size, of any significant size. And so I do really believe that, that is something that's really important to actually have in the industry, and one that I'm willing to make ridiculous sacrifices in order to.
You are making ridiculous sacrifices. And you're doing it all from home now.
Yeah, exactly.
How has that been?
I like to travel. And for those of you who have seen my Instagram, I definitely travel a lot. And it's very weird now doing all of this from your house and from a couch. And
Yeah.
institutional investors certainly have not had a history of like making decisions via Zoom.
Right.
That's not how those LP conversations generally roll out. So I've been mostly talking to individual investors and so-called
Yeah.
high net worth individuals who can invest in LP funds and smaller family offices. And that in and of itself can be a slog.
Yeah. Do you think they'll change? I mean, just because like that's not how the world works. Like you're not flying out to San Francisco anytime soon, or do you think that'll just be back to some normal?
Institutional VCs have money to deploy and it's sitting on the sidelines. And at some point, yes, I think they will have to figure out in this new world, how do we get to a level of comfortability, possibly without getting on a plane to meet someone in person.
Yeah. What do you think? This is separate, but you went through the music industry at one point.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the music industry in this whole thing? I mean, they like employ lots of people. They're not like Zoom where it's like, oh, this is just weirdly good news for us. It seems like terrible news for that business.
Yeah, it has sort of decimated the touring industry for a while. I can't imagine when people are going to be ready to go back out to see a show, right? And be in a crowded stadium.
Yeah.
So I think the touring musician is going to have a rough time.
Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, Warner just IPO'd. So
so there you go.
So who knows? It's like.
So what do you make?
Out and right is left. Stock market's doing really well.
Yeah.
So,
just stop making predictions. Like, what do you make? So I'll kind of finish up. But in terms of the overall movement, is it the Black Lives Matter movement? Is it different this time, writ large? And then I'll ask you about Silicon Valley separately.
Yeah, I think it's different this time because there are many more people out in the streets protesting with us, right? Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, because I think for as long as it was just Black people protesting and saying that Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, it wasn't enough of a shock to the system to actually make anything change.
Yeah.
I like to say about many things, but I am cautiously optimistic. I certainly remember my optimism around November 2016, and as a result, I don't take anything for granted anymore.
How'd that go?
I take nothing for granted. And so I am cautiously optimistic that there are things in the world that are changing, and that those changes will be positive changes for Black people in the United States and in other places too.
And do you think the same for Silicon Valley? Like, do you think people are finally going, oh yeah, I haven't done enough and I need to do something at this point?
Yeah, again, cautiously optimistic. The challenge with Silicon Valley and with VCs in particular, and I'll even throw myself into what I'm about to say, is that VCs have the attention span of a 4-year-old. And so on a good day. And so in order to make true change, you have to make a systemic institutional change, right? You can't just count on the attention spans of the VC class. You can't count on the fact that 18 months from now they could be on some other thing that is really important to them at the time.
Right.
And so how do you create long-term systemic change in venture capital? A typical venture fund is 10 plus 2 plus 2.
Right.
And so like, you need to make sure that you are creating that kind of long-term change that will go on from not just this moment, but for the next 10 to 12 years at least.
Yeah. And at this point, you're cautiously optimistic.
I'm cautiously optimistic. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Hey, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time and appreciate your generosity with your time. It's really nice of you.
Yeah, I'm always glad and excited to see you.
Thanks
We
so much.
haven't seen each other since shelter in place. So
It's ridiculous. All right. This has been the Something Ventured podcast. Monique Woodard, my guest. Talk to you guys next time.